The engine roared, then sputtered, as if the old convertible knew we were running from something. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, while the endless Nevada highway blurred past us, a ribbon of asphalt slicing through the desert's heart. Beside me, Ethan, my brother's best friend, sprawled in the passenger seat, his laughter cutting through the wind like a song I didn't know I needed. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be back in Portland, drowning in spreadsheets for a job I hated, pretending I had my life together at 24. But when my brother, Jake, called me last week, his voice tight with worry, saying Ethan needed to get out of town fast, I didn't ask questions. I just packed a bag, threw it in the trunk of my beat-up Mustang, and picked Ethan up at a gas station on the edge of town. He'd been standing there, all lean muscle and restless energy, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his hazel eyes scanning the horizon like he was waiting for trouble to catch up. "Relax, Caleb," Ethan said now, his voice low and teasing, pulling me back to the present. He kicked his boots up on the dashboard, the soles caked with red desert dust. "You look like you're about to drive us off a cliff." I shot him a glare, but my lips twitched. "Maybe I will if you keep putting your dirty boots on my car." He grinned, that lopsided smile that always made my brother laugh, the one that was starting to do something dangerous to my chest. I didn't know Ethan well, not really. He'd been Jake's shadow since high school, the guy who showed up at our house with a skateboard and a smirk, always a little too charming, a little too reckless. I was the quiet one, the one who stayed in his room with books and dreams of leaving our small town behind. But now, here we were, two near strangers on a road trip to nowhere, with secrets neither of us was ready to spill. The truth was, I didn't know why Ethan needed to leave Portland so fast. Jake had been vague, something about a bad breakup, a fight, maybe trouble with the law. All he'd said was, "Take him to L.A. Caleb. Keep him safe. He's not himself." I didn't know what not himself meant. But looking at Ethan now, humming along to some old Springsteen song on the radio, I couldn't imagine him as anything but this: wild, alive, untouchable. We stopped that first night at a rundown motel just outside Vegas, the kind with flickering neon signs and questionable stains on the carpet. I paid for a room with 2 beds, using the cash Jake had slipped me before we left. Ethan didn't offer to chip in, and I didn't ask. He was quieter now, leaning against the doorframe, staring out at the parking lot like it held answers he couldn't find. "You okay?" I asked, tossing my keys on the nightstand. He didn't look at me. "Yeah, just tired." I didn't believe him, but I didn't push. Instead, I grabbed my toothbrush and headed for the bathroom, leaving him to his thoughts. When I came back, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands, his shoulders slumped like the weight of the world had finally caught up. "Ethan," I said softly, sitting across from him. "What's going on? Why are we doing this?" For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked up, his eyes raw, unguarded. "You ever feel like you're running from something you can't see, but you know it's there?" I nodded, my throat tight. I knew that feeling too well, the weight of expectations, of hiding who I was, of pretending I didn't notice the way my heart raced when certain guys smiled at me. I'd never told anyone, not even Jake, especially not Jake. "I messed up, Caleb," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Back in Portland, I got into some stuff I shouldn't have. And then there was this guy." My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. "A guy?" He laughed, bitter and sharp. "Yeah, a guy. Thought I could handle him, but I couldn't. And now I'm here, dragging you into my mess." I wanted to ask more. to dig into the cracks of his story. But something in his eyes stopped me. Instead, I said, "You're not dragging me. I'm here because I want to be." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for a moment, the air between us felt charged, like the desert before a storm. Then he smiled, softer this time, and said, "You're a good guy, Caleb. Better than I deserve." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. We turned off the lights and lay in our separate beds, the hum of the motel's air conditioner filling the silence. But as I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was about to change everything. The next morning, we hit the road again, the sun blazing overhead as we crossed into Arizona. Ethan was back to his usual self, cracking jokes and stealing my fries when we stopped at a diner. But there was a tension between us now, a thread pulled tight, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to cut it or pull it closer. By the time we reached the Grand Canyon, the sky was a riot of pinks and oranges, and Ethan insisted we pull over to watch the sunset. We stood at the edge of the canyon, the vastness of it swallowing our words. He was close enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm next to mine. And when he turned to me, his eyes catching the last light of the day, I felt a spark, a pull, something I'd been running from my whole life. "Caleb," he said, his voice low, "you ever think about what you'd do if you weren't afraid?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Every day?" He didn't say anything else, but he didn't need to. The road stretched out before us, and I knew, deep down, that this trip wasn't just about getting Ethan to L.A. It was about finding something someone I didn't know I was looking for. The Grand Canyon's edge felt like the end of the world, its vastness daring us to speak truths we weren't ready for. Ethan's question lingered in the air: what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I couldn't shake it as we climbed back into the Mustang, the night swallowing the last traces of daylight. I drove in silence, my hands steady on the wheel but my mind racing, replaying the way Ethan's eyes had held mine, searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. We found a campsite a few miles down the road, a small clearing surrounded by scrubby pines and the distant howl of coyotes. Ethan built a fire with practiced ease, his movements quick and sure, like he'd done this 100 times. I watched him, the firelight casting shadows across his face, and wondered how someone could seem so fearless and so broken at the same time. "You're staring," he said, not looking up from the fire. I flushed, grateful for the darkness. "Just wondering how you learned to do that." He smirked, tossing another stick into the flames. "Camping with Jake. Your brother's hopeless with a fire. By the way, nearly burned down our tent once." I laughed, the tension easing for a moment. "Yeah, that sounds like Jake." We sat cross-legged on the ground, the fire crackling between us, and shared a bag of marshmallows we'd picked up at a gas station. Ethan roasted his to a perfect golden brown, while mine caught fire and turned to charcoal. He laughed, loud and unguarded, and for a second, it felt like we were just two guys on a road trip, not two people running from their pasts. But the weight of his earlier words hadn't left me. I took a deep breath, the smoke stinging my eyes, and said, "You didn't answer your own question earlier. What would you do if you weren't afraid?" He went still, the marshmallow stick dangling in his hand. For a long moment, he stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "I'd stop running," he said finally. "I'd tell the truth. About everything." "Everything?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. He looked at me then, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, everything." I wanted to push, to ask what truths he was hiding, but the intensity in his gaze stopped me. Instead, I nodded and looked away, focusing on the stars above us, brighter than I'd ever seen in Portland. We didn't speak again that night, but as we crawled into our sleeping bags, the silence felt different, less like a barrier and more like a bridge. The next day, we drove through Arizona's red rock country, the landscape shifting from desert to towering mesas that seemed to touch the sky. Ethan was quieter than usual, his usual banter replaced by long stretches of staring out the window. I didn't mind. There was something comforting about the quiet, about the hum of the engine and the open road ahead. We stopped in a small town for lunch, a diner with checkered floors and a jukebox that only played Johnny Cash. Ethan slid into the booth across from me, his knee brushing mine under the table. I froze, my heart stuttering, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, and he was just better at pretending. "So," he said, stealing a fry from my plate. "What's your deal?" "Caleb, you're, what, 24? Got a girlfriend back home? Boyfriend?" The question caught me off guard, and I nearly choked on my burger. "No," I said quickly, too quickly. "No one." He raised an eyebrow, his grin teasing but not unkind. "Come on, man. You're telling me no one's ever caught your eye?" I shrugged, my face burning. "I'm picky." "Picky," he repeated, leaning back in the booth, his eyes never leaving mine. "Or scared?" I didn't answer, and he didn't push. But the question hung between us, heavy as the desert heat outside. I'd never told anyone I was gay, not Jake. Not my parents. Not even myself. Not out loud. It was a truth I'd buried so deep I barely recognized it anymore. But sitting across from Ethan, with his easy smile and piercing gaze, I felt that truth clawing its way to the surface. We hit the road again, the afternoon sun beating down as we crossed into New Mexico. The Mustang's air conditioning was shot, so we drove with the windows down, the wind whipping through the car. Ethan turned up the radio, some old rock song blaring through the speakers, and started singing along, his voice rough but full of life. I couldn't help but smile, and when he caught me, he reached over and punched my shoulder lightly. "Sing, Caleb," he shouted over the music. "Live a little." I laughed, shaking my head, but something in his voice, his joy, his recklessness made me want to try. So I did, my voice shaky and off-key. But Ethan just grinned wider, like I'd given him a gift. For the first time in years, I felt light, like the weight of who I was supposed to be had lifted, if only for a moment. That night, we stopped at a cheap motel in Albuquerque, the kind with peeling paint and a vending machine that only dispensed off-brand soda. Ethan flopped onto his bed, arms behind his head, staring at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of mine, picking at a loose thread on my jeans, trying to find the courage to ask the question that had been burning in me all day. "Ethan," I said finally, my voice quiet, "what happened in Portland? With that guy?" He didn't move, but I saw his jaw tighten. "It's complicated," he said after a long pause. His name was Ryan. We were something. Not quite together, but not just friends. He wanted more. And I didn't know how to give it to him. "Why not?" I asked, my heart pounding. He turned his head to look at me, his eyes dark and searching. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant. Of what people would think. Afraid of losing everything." I nodded, my throat tight. I knew that fear too well. "And now?" "Now." He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Now I'm here. With you. Trying to figure out who the hell I am." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded again, the weight of his words settling over me like dust. We turned off the lights and lay in the dark, the hum of the motel's neon sign buzzing outside. But as I drifted toward sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something bigger than either of us could handle. The New Mexico sunrise painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, but I barely noticed it as I loaded our bags into the Mustang. Ethan was already in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, a cup of gas station coffee in his hand. He looked like he belonged there, like the road was his home, and I wondered if I'd ever feel that kind of ease anywhere. We drove east, the landscape flattening into endless plains that seemed to stretch forever. Ethan was quieter today, his usual energy subdued, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap. Last night's conversation hung between us, unspoken but heavy, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Around noon, we stopped at a roadside attraction, kitschy museum dedicated to UFOs, complete with a giant plastic alien out front. Ethan's eyes lit up for the first time all day, and he dragged me inside, his enthusiasm infectious. We wandered through exhibits of grainy photos and conspiracy theories, laughing at the absurdity of it all. For a moment, it felt like we were just two friends, not two people carrying secrets too big to share. "Caleb," Ethan said as we stood in front of a replica spaceship, his voice light but curious. "You believe in this stuff? Aliens? Other worlds?" I shrugged, adjusting my glasses. "I don't know. Seems like if there's life out there, it's probably just as messy as it is here." He laughed, a real laugh, and nudged my shoulder. "You're probably right. But sometimes I think about another world, where you can be whoever you want. No judgment." His words hit harder than I expected, and I looked away, pretending to study a display case. "Yeah," I said softly. "That'd be nice." We left the museum with a handful of tacky souvenirs, a keychain for me, a glow-in-the-dark alien for Ethan, and climbed back into the car. The mood was lighter now, but I could still feel the undercurrent of something unspoken. As we drove, Ethan fiddled with the radio, settling on a country station that made me groan. "No way," I said, reaching for the dial. "We're not listening to this." He swatted my hand away, grinning. "Come on, give it a chance. It's road trip music." "It's torture," I shot back, but I was smiling too. Our hands brushed as we fought over the dial, and I pulled back, my skin tingling. Ethan didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't stop noticing his laugh, his smile, the way he filled the space around him with life. By late afternoon, we reached Texas, the air thick with humidity and the promise of rain. We stopped at a small park to stretch our legs, a quiet place with a pond and a rickety wooden dock. Ethan walked to the edge of the dock, his hands in his pockets, staring out at the water. I followed, keeping a careful distance, afraid of what might happen if I got too close. "You ever think about just staying somewhere?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "Like, not running anymore?" He didn't answer right away. The wind rippled the water, and a dragonfly buzzed past. "Sometimes," he said finally, "but it's hard to imagine. Everywhere I go, I feel like I'm carrying Portland with me. Ryan. All of it." I nodded, my chest tight. "I get that. I feel like I'm carrying my whole life with me too. All the things I haven't said." He turned to me, his eyes searching. "What haven't you said, Caleb?" My heart pounded, and for a moment, I thought I might tell him about the nights I'd spent lying awake, wondering what it would be like to be honest, to be myself. But the words stuck in my throat, and I looked away, focusing on the water instead. "Nothing," I mumbled. "Forget it." He didn't push, but I felt his gaze on me, steady and warm. We stood there in silence, the weight of our unspoken truths pressing down on us, until the first drops of rain began to fall. That night, We checked into another motel. This one with a leaky roof and a faint smell of mildew. Ethan was back to his playful self, tossing a hacky sack he'd found in the car and challenging me to a game in the parking lot. I was terrible at it. My coordination no match for his. But his laughter made it worth it. "Man, you're hopeless," he said, catching the hacky sack midair. "How do you survive without me?" I rolled my eyes, but my heart wasn't in it. "I've been doing just fine." "Yeah." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You sure about that?" The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through our clothes, but neither of us moved. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, I thought he might say something real, something that would change everything. But then a car pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the rain, and the moment was gone. We ran inside, laughing and dripping wet, and collapsed onto our beds. But as I lay there, listening to the rain against the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The road was leading us somewhere, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what we'd find. The Texas rain followed us into Oklahoma, a steady drizzle that turned the highways slick and the air heavy. I drove with the wipers on, their rhythmic thud matching the beat of my heart as I stole glances at Ethan. He was sketching in a small notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration, and I wondered what he was drawing: landscapes, memories, or maybe something he couldn't say out loud. We'd been on the road for 5 days now, and the space between us felt different, charged with a quiet intensity that made every glance, every touch, feel like a risk. I wanted to ask him about Ryan, about what had gone wrong, but every time I opened my mouth, the words felt too big, too dangerous. Instead, I focused on the road, on the next mile marker, on keeping us moving forward. We stopped in Oklahoma City for lunch, finding a barbecue joint with smoky ribs and a waitress who called us sugar. Ethan was in high spirits, charming the staff and stealing half my coleslaw when he thought I wasn't looking. I pretended to be annoyed, but the truth was, I liked this version of him, the one who laughed easily, who made the world feel brighter just by being in it. "Your trouble," I said, pointing a rib at him. He grinned, leaning forward. "And you're just figuring that out." I laughed, but there was a heat in his eyes that made my stomach flip. I looked down at my plate, suddenly shy, and he didn't push it. But the moment lingered, a spark waiting to catch fire. Back on the road, the rain cleared, and the sun broke through, casting golden light across the plains. Ethan rolled down his window, letting the warm air rush in, and started telling stories: wild, half-true tales about skateboarding accidents and high school pranks with Jake. I listened, laughing at the right moments. But part of me was somewhere else, imagining a world where I could be as open as he was, where I didn't have to hide. We pulled into a small town that evening, a place with one stoplight and a diner that doubled as a bar. Ethan suggested we grab a drink, and I hesitated. Alcohol had a way of loosening tongues, and I wasn't sure I trusted mine. But he was already out of the car, his grin daring me to follow. So I did. The bar was dimly lit, filled with locals and the smell of cheap beer. We sat at a corner table, nursing our drinks, and Ethan started asking questions, real ones, not the surface-level stuff we'd been dancing around. "So, Caleb," he said, swirling his beer, "what's the plan? You gonna stay in Portland forever? Crunching numbers?" I shrugged, tracing the rim of my glass. "I don't know. I never really thought about it. Just doing what's expected, I guess." He leaned forward, his voice low. "And what do you want?" The question hit like a punch, and I looked away, my heart racing. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe to figure out who I am without all the noise." He nodded, like he understood, and for a moment, We just sat there, the jukebox playing some old love song in the background. Then he said, "You're more than you think you are, Caleb. You just don't see it yet." I didn't know how to respond, so I took a sip of my drink, letting the burn distract me from the warmth spreading through my chest. We stayed at the bar longer than we should have, talking about nothing and everything. And by the time we stumbled back to the motel, we were both a little tipsy, laughing at some stupid joke Ethan had made. In the room, he kicked off his shoes and flopped onto his bed, his arms spread wide. "This trip," he said, staring at the ceiling. "It's the best thing I've done in a long time." Yeah. I sat on the edge of my bed, watching him, even with me. He turned his head, his eyes soft. "Especially with you." My breath caught, and I looked away, afraid of what my face might give away. We turned off the lights and lay in the dark, the silence thick with possibility. I wanted to say something, to tell him how he was starting to unravel me, but the words stayed locked inside, where they'd always been. The next morning, we crossed into Missouri, the landscape shifting to rolling hills and dense forests. Ethan was quiet again, his notebook open in his lap. But this time, he showed me what he'd been drawing, a sketch of the Grand Canyon, all sharp lines and soft shadows. It was beautiful, and I told him so. "Thanks," he said, his voice shy for once. "I've been drawing a lot lately. Helps me think." "About what?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. He didn't answer right away. "About who I want to be," he said finally. "About what I'm leaving behind." I nodded, my hands tightening on the wheel. I wanted to tell him I was thinking the same thing, that this trip was making me question everything I'd ever known about myself. But instead, I said, "You're good at it. The drawing." He smiled, small and genuine. "Maybe I'll draw you next." The idea made my heart skip, and I didn't trust myself to respond. We drove on, the miles slipping away, and with every passing hour, I felt the distance between who I was and who I wanted to be growing smaller and more terrifying. Missouri's green hills gave way to Illinois, the road flattening into a straight line that felt like it could carry us to the edge of the world. Ethan was sketching again, his pencil scratching softly against the page, and I wondered if he was drawing me like he'd promised. The thought made my chest tight, a mix of fear and something I wasn't ready to name. We stopped at a rest area in the early afternoon, a quiet spot with picnic tables and a view of the Mississippi River. Ethan stretched out on the grass, his hands behind his head, staring up at the clouds. I sat nearby, picking at blades of grass, trying to find the courage to say something real. "You're quiet today," he said, not looking at me. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I hesitated, my fingers stilling. "Just thinking about home, about what happens when this trip is over." He turned his head, his eyes meeting mine. "You don't have to go back. You know, you could start over, somewhere new." The idea was tempting, but it scared me too. "What about you?" I asked. "Where are you going after L.A.?" He shrugged, looking back at the sky. "Haven't figured that out yet. Maybe I'll just keep driving." The thought of him disappearing into the horizon made my stomach twist. I didn't want this trip to end, not because of the road, but because of him. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but then he sat up, his expression shifting. "Caleb," he said, his voice serious, "can I tell you something?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah." He took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "Back in Portland, with Ryan, it wasn't just a fight. I loved him, or I thought I did, but I couldn't be what he needed. I couldn't be out." The words hit me like a wave. and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "You're gay?" he said, the words steady but heavy. "Yeah, and I've been running from it for a long time." I stared at him, my mind racing. I wanted to tell him I understood, that I was carrying the same secret, but fear clamped down on my throat. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry. That sounds hard." He laughed, a bitter edge to it. "Hard doesn't even cover it. But being here, with you, it's the first time in a while I've felt like I could breathe." His words broke something in me, and before I could stop myself, I said, "I'm glad you're here." He looked at me, his eyes softening, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. But then a car pulled into the rest area, its engine loud and jarring, and the moment slipped away. We drove on, crossing into Indiana as the sun began to set. The air was cooler now, the fields giving way to small towns with white picket fences and glowing streetlights. Ethan was quieter after his confession, but there was a new ease between us, like a wall had come down. That night, we stopped at a bed and breakfast, a cozy place run by an older couple who treated us like their own kids. We shared a room with a single queen bed, our only option. The woman at the desk had said with an apologetic smile, and I felt my nerves spike as we carried our bags upstairs. "I can take the floor," I said quickly, setting my bag down. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't be a martyr, Caleb. We can share." My face burned, but I nodded, trying to act like it was no big deal. We climbed into bed, keeping a careful distance, but the space between us felt alive, electric. I lay awake for hours, listening to his steady breathing, wondering what it would be like to close the gap. The next morning, we woke to the smell of fresh coffee and pancakes. Ethan was already up, sitting by the window, his sketchbook open. I peeked over his shoulder and saw a drawing of Mimi profile, my glasses slightly crooked, my expression soft and unguarded. It was so detailed, so intimate, that I felt exposed. "You weren't kidding," I said, my voice shaky. He grinned, closing the book. "Told you I'd draw you." We ate breakfast in silence, the weight of the drawing lingering between us. As we hit the road again, I felt a shift, like we were moving towards something inevitable. Ethan turned on the radio, singing along to some old pop song, and I joined in, my voice stronger this time. He laughed, reaching over to ruffle my hair, and the touch sent a jolt through me. By evening, we reached Ohio, the landscape familiar now, like we were circling closer to something we couldn't avoid. We stopped at a lake, the water still and glassy, reflecting the stars above. Ethan skipped stones across the surface, his movements fluid and sure, and I watched, my heart aching with something I couldn't name. "Caleb," he said, turning to me, "what are you afraid of?" The question caught me off guard, and I looked down at the pebbles in my hand. "Everything," I admitted, but mostly, being honest, about who I am. He stepped closer, his voice soft. "You don't have to be afraid with me." I looked up, and his eyes were so open, so kind, that I felt the truth rising in me like a tide. But before I could speak, he reached out, his hand brushing mine, and the world tilted. The touch of Ethan's hand lingered on mine, a fleeting warmth that felt like a promise and a question all at once. We stood by the Ohio lake, the night air cool and heavy with the scent of water and pine. I wanted to say it, "I am gay," too, but the words caught in my throat, tangled in years of fear and silence. Ethan didn't push. He just squeezed my hand once, gently, then let go, turning back to the lake. "Come on," he said, his voice light but strained. "Let's keep moving." We drove through the night, The road a dark ribbon under the stars. Ethan fell asleep in the passenger seat, his head tilted against the window, and I stole glances at him, his face soft in the dashboard's glow. I wondered what it would be like to wake up next to him, to not have to hide. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying, a line I wasn't sure I could cross. By morning, we were in Pennsylvania, the landscape shifting to rolling hills and dense forests. We stopped at a small diner for breakfast, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the pancakes were fluffy. Ethan was back to his playful self, stealing bites of my bacon and teasing me about my terrible aim with the hacky sack. But there was a new softness in his eyes, a quiet understanding that made my heart race. As we ate, he pulled out his sketchbook and slid it across the table. "Look," he said, his voice shy. I opened it and found another drawing of Met his one from the lake. My silhouette against the water. My expression caught somewhere between fear and hope. It was beautiful, and it made my chest ache. "You're really good," I said, handing the book back. "You should do something with this." He shrugged, but his smile was genuine. "Maybe, if I ever figure out where I'm going." We hit the road again, the miles slipping away as we talked about everything and nothing. Favorite movies, worst teachers, the time Jake got stuck in a tree trying to impress a girl. But beneath the laughter, there was a current of something deeper, something we were both circling around. That afternoon, we stopped at a state park, a quiet place with hiking trails and a waterfall. Ethan insisted we explore, and I followed, my sneakers slipping on the mossy rocks. He was ahead of me, his laughter echoing as he splashed through a shallow stream, and I couldn't help but smile. He was so alive, so unapologetically himself, and it made me want to be brave. We reached the waterfall, its roar drowning out the world, and sat on a flat rock nearby. Ethan leaned back, his hands behind his head, and said, "This is what I needed. This, freedom." I nodded, my throat tight. "Me too." He turned to me, his eyes searching. "Caleb, what you said last night, about being honest. You meant it, didn't you?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Yeah." He sat up, his gaze steady. "Then tell me. Whatever it is. I'm listening." I took a deep breath, the words trembling on the edge of my lips. I'm gay," I said, the words barely audible over the waterfall. "I've never told anyone. Not Jake. Not my parents. No one." For a moment, he just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, soft and warm, and said, "Thank you for trusting me." I felt lighter, like a weight I'd carried for years had finally lifted. But there was something else, to a new fear, a new hope. I looked at him, his face so close to mine, and said, "What about you? What happens now?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek, and my breath caught. "I don't know," he said softly, "but I want to find out." The moment stretched, fragile and perfect, and then he leaned in, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was soft and tentative but electric. I kissed him back, my hands finding his shoulders, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, and he laughed, a shaky, joyful sound. "Well," he said, "that's one way to answer a question." I laughed too, my face burning but my heart soaring. We sat there for a long time, the waterfall's roar a backdrop to our quiet, shared smiles. But as the sun began to set, reality crept back in. We were still on the run, still carrying our pasts. And L.A. was getting closer. That night, We stayed at a campsite, sharing a tent to save money. We lay side by side, our sleeping bags touching, and I could feel the warmth of him next to me. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was comfortable now, filled with possibility. As I drifted towards sleep, I realized this trip wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about me, too, about finding the courage to be myself, to love without fear. And for the first time, I believed I could. The kiss by the waterfall changed everything. As we drove through Pennsylvania's winding roads, the air between us was different, lighter, but heavier too, like we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Ethan's hand rested on the console between us, close enough to touch, and I kept stealing glances at it, wondering if I was brave enough to take it. We stopped in a small town for lunch, a place with cobblestone streets and a cafe that smelled like fresh bread. Ethan was quieter now, but his smiles were softer, more deliberate, like he was letting me in. We sat outside, the autumn air crisp, and shared a sandwich, our knees brushing under the table. Every touch felt like a spark, and I wondered if he felt it too. "Caleb," he said, his voice low as he leaned across the table. "You okay with what happened?" I nodded, my face warm. "Yeah, more than okay." He grinned, relief flashing in his eyes. "Good. Because I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I don't want to stop." My heart raced, and I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling as they laced with his. "Me neither," I said, and the words felt like a vow. We drove on, crossing into New York, the landscape shifting to dense forests and misty valleys. The closer we got to L.A., the more I felt the weight of what was coming. Ethan hadn't told me everything about Portland, about Ryan, about why he was running. And I hadn't told him about the fear that still gnawed at me, fear of what Jake would say, what my parents would think, what the world would do to us. That evening, we stopped at a diner, the neon sign buzzing in the twilight. Ethan was sketching again, his pencil moving quickly across the page. I leaned over and saw a drawing of us sitting by the waterfall, our faces close, our hands touching. It was so raw, so real, that it took my breath away. "You're gonna run out of pages," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He smiled, closing the book. "Then I'll just have to keep you around to inspire me." We laughed, but there was a tension beneath it, a question neither of us was ready to ask. What happens when we reach L.A.? We finished our meal and drove to a nearby motel, the kind with creaky floors and faded wallpaper. We shared a bed again, lying closer this time, our hands brushing in the dark. "Caleb," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm scared." I turned to face him, our faces inches apart. "Of what?" "Of losing this," he said. "Of losing you." My heart ached, and I reached for him, pulling him close. We didn't kiss, didn't speak, just held each other, the world outside fading away. For the first time, I felt like I could be enough for him, for myself. The next morning, we crossed into Ohio again, looping back to pick up a different route to avoid traffic. The road felt endless now, but I didn't mind. Every mile with Ethan was a mile I wanted to keep. We stopped at a pumpkin patch, a whimsical detour that felt like a gift. Ethan ran through the rows of pumpkins, laughing like a kid, and I chased him, my heart lighter than it had ever been. We sat on a hay bale, sharing a caramel apple, and he leaned his head on my shoulder. "This is what I want," he said softly. "This feeling. Forever." I nodded, my throat tight. "Me too." But as we drove on, the weight of reality crept back in. Ethan's phone buzzed, a rare occurrence since he'd kept it off most of the trip. He glanced at the screen, his face tightening. and I knew it was Ryan. He didn't answer, but the mood shifted, the lightness fading. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "Yeah, just old ghosts." I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. Instead, I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently, and he squeezed back. We drove in silence, the road stretching toward an uncertain future. And I wondered if we could outrun our pasts or if they'd catch up no matter how far we went. The final stretch to Los Angeles felt like a countdown. The highways widened, the air grew warmer, and the weight of our destination pressed heavier with every mile. Ethan was quiet, his sketchbook closed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, but I was afraid of the answer, afraid it would break the fragile thing we'd built. We stopped in Arizona again, the desert familiar now, like an old friend. We sat on the hood of the Mustang, watching the stars emerge, and Ethan finally spoke. "Caleb," he said, his voice low, "when we get to L.A., I need to deal with some things. Ryan, he's there." My stomach twisted, but I nodded. "Okay, what does that mean for us?" He looked at me, his eyes raw. "I don't know, but I know I don't want to lose you." I reached for his hand, my heart pounding. "You won't." We drove through the night, crossing into California as the sun rose. The city loomed ahead, a sprawl of lights and possibility, and I felt a mix of excitement and dread. We checked into a small motel on the outskirts of L.A., and Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, he answered, stepping outside to talk. I watched through the window, his shoulders tense, his free hand running through his hair. When he came back, his face was pale. "Ryan wants to meet," he said. "Tomorrow." I nodded, my throat tight. "Do you want me to come with you?" He shook his head. "I need to do this alone. But stay close. Okay." "Always," I said, and I meant it. The next day, Ethan left for his meeting, and I wandered the city, my heart heavy. I thought about calling Jake, telling him everything, but I wasn't ready. Instead, I sat in a coffee shop, watching the world go by, and realized how far I'd come, not just in miles, but in who I was. This trip had cracked me open, and Ethan was the reason. He returned that evening, his eyes tired but clear. "It's over," he said, sitting beside me on the motel bed. "Ryan and I were done. For good." I nodded, relief flooding me. "And now?" He smiled, soft and certain. "Now, I'm free, and I want to be with you." I kissed him then, fierce and unafraid, and he kissed me back, his hands cupping my face. We spent the night wrapped in each other, the city humming outside, and I knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, we stood by the Mustang, the road behind us and the future ahead. "What now?" I asked. Ethan grinned, his hand in mine. "We keep driving. Together." And as we hit the highway, the wind in our hair and the world wide open, I realized that this trip hadn't just stolen my heart, it had given me the courage to claim it.